I'm delighted to welcome to the Wellness Unwrapped podcast, Dr Sarah Davies.
Hi Susie.
Hi, thank you so much for coming on.
Oh, thank you for inviting me. I'm really happy to be here.
Oh, so I was reminiscing this morning the first time that we met, which was a few years ago, and I came over to your house.
Yeah.
And we were just so happy to find each other, weren't we?
I know, I think it was about 3.5 years ago now, something like that. And at that time there were very few people that I knew of who were interested in functional medicine. So to find someone else that was as passionate about it as I was really, really exciting for me. So we got that like a house on fire.
We really did,
yeah.
We did. So I'm going to say straight up that my title is a bit of a mystery to the vast number of people who I meet. So they'll look at the health coach bit and say, oh, so you mean you're a life coach? And I'll say, actually no, I mean I'm a health coach. And then they'll look at the first bit and they'll say, functional medicine. What? What on earth is that? I've never heard of it. So I'm going to start by asking you to explain what that is and how you got into it.
So, yeah, the easiest way to explain functional medicine is that instead of looking at a traditional system of diagnosis and then labelling of health conditions. Instead, we start to ask the question why people develop health problems, and maybe why it is they're not achieving their optimal potential in health. So it's really about looking at root causes.
Okay.
So my role as a functional medicine doctor is really to help patients explore themselves. What is it maybe in their inherited background? You know, do they have a genetic problem that perhaps we need to work with? What is it in their daily life that could perhaps be holding them back or limiting them from achieving their real potential in terms of health?
Okay. And how did you, what prompted you to move away from practicing medicine in the way that you were taught to this new framework?
So I became a doctor because I really wanted to help people. And that's, you know, if you ask most doctors, they will actually say they wanted to help people. That's why we go into the profession. And I realised that as I worked as a GP, there were certain patients that I just couldn't really do much for. And so these patients generally had quite chronic health problems, maybe chronic fatigue, maybe autoimmune conditions, that we didn't really have any good answers for in traditional medicine. But what I noticed was that lots of these patients would actually start to heal themselves through changing their diet, through lifestyle modification. And I was really fascinated that these modalities of treatment were really, really effective. You know, for some people they could actually, I had a friend who reversed her chronic fatigue from which she was wheelchair bound just by changing her diet. And I used to climb with her, so she was my first real introduction to what we were missing out on as a profession. And as I started to kind of learn about this kind of alternative subculture in terms of health, I became more and more fascinated with trying to help people in this way. So I did a lot of learning myself, and started just on a one-to-one basis with my NHS patients to start improving diet, looking at what the possible causes could be, and then I also learned about elimination diets for specific sort of allergic conditions and autoimmune conditions, and was really fascinated to see that actually without any drugs you could empower a patient to get themselves well.
Yeah.
And so when I learned about this, I was really excited, but no one else that I worked with was really sort of impressed by that, and nobody else was interested. In fact, I would just get told off for overrunning my clinic time. So I had a friend who was a consultant anaesthetist at the time, and she was fascinated by this as well, and she was running trials on vitamin D levels pre-surgery and about patient outcomes with that. She was massively interested in nutrition, and we got talking, and she saw the Institute for Functional Medicine course on in London, and at that point they'd only really mainly run them in the States, and we both had very small children at the time. So she said, right, we're booking on it, and that was in 2015 now. So I went along to AFMCP in 2015, and learned about functional medicine for the first time sort of formally, and was just blown away. One of the things about learning functional medicine, about how you can change people's lives through diet, sleep, nutrition, and kind of de-stressing, is that once you've learned all that and you've seen how effective it is, you can't really go back to practicing medicine normally again. So I think, you know, from that point forward, my whole kind of desire to help people really started to sort of coalesce around using functional medicine and lifestyle techniques to help people.
And they are so effective. Like, I was just thinking when you were talking about that I was in a company yesterday, so I do a lot of group workshops at companies, and I'd gone back to a company where I originally visited to do the first workshop 2 weeks ago, just over 2 weeks ago. And I'd been talking then about food, so that was the first subject, and then I went back and spoke about sleep. And at the first one, the boss of the company, very, very bright lady, very driven, very successful. She had told me, well, she told the group, there was about 15 people in the room, that she does a poo every 2 weeks.
Okay.
Yes, and that at one point that had actually been every 6 weeks. She's gone 6 weeks, and she'd ended up in hospital, unsurprisingly. So, and I sort of intimated to her that you know, once every 2 weeks is not really great. Elimination is so important, and I was talking to everyone. I was asking them what they eat for breakfast and what they're drinking, and I talked to them about the importance of, you know, of eating healthily and what that meant. Nothing revolutionary, you know. It was nothing that you can't read in 1,001 different places. But one of the things she wasn't doing was she wasn't drinking any water whatsoever, and she was drinking tons of coffee and tea, alcohol, but not a drop of water. And certainly, it was not news to her that we should be drinking water. She'd probably heard it a million times, but she wasn't doing it. So there's always this gulf between the information, knowing what we should be doing, and actually doing it. But she went away really fired up, as did everyone in the room. And she said, that's it, I'm going to start drinking water, I'm going to start eating healthily. So I went back yesterday, and the first thing she announces again in this room is, she said, Susie, since last time I saw you, I've done 44 poos. Isn't that great?
That's fantastic.
Yeah, no one has ever said that to me. I mean, it's just, Susie, I've done X number of poos since I last saw it. I mean, it was just, I was completely blown away. But to go from once every 2 weeks to, and I was kind of trying to do the maths in my head, it's nearly 3 a day. You know, just from 1 week to the next. And then she started working out. So this was, again, in a 2 week span, a 2 week period. She'd got her digestion sorted out and was gone from this chronically bad eliminator to like a world championship, you know, and she was working out and had loads of energy, and her tummy was flatter, and she felt great, and that was just such a simple thing. So
that's one of the problems in terms of the image of functional medicine, is that what we do often appears to be very simple.
Yeah.
And it's so simple that it's difficult to believe that it's going to be effective or life-changing.
Yes.
And I think, yeah, so we have a bit of an image problem in that way, because actually, as you say, all the information about drinking water, about eating healthily, it's all out there, and people kind of know it. But there's a big gulf between knowing and doing. And so, you know, coaching, as you're offering, is actually really important, because unless somebody has your confidence that something's going to work, changing behaviours is quite a hard thing to do.
It's really tough.
And knowing that there's going to be a good outcome from it, that needs you know, whoever's giving the information to actually believe in it too. And so for me, my confidence in what's possible with simple functional medicine techniques has really grown over the years as I watch people just amazingly transform their lives through very, very simple regime changes like you've discussed.
Yeah. And what I found so often, I mean, you talked about, you know, people going from wheelchair to, I mean, those are sort of miraculous
These are
outcomes.
miraculous things, but, you know, I always wondered if only 0.5% of the wheelchair-bound chronic fatigue patients could improve just through diet, we should still be doing it with every single one of them, just to see, because those patients' lives are, they're terrible. They have very poor quality of life, and we're talking about a low-cost, extremely safe intervention that at least should be tried. There might not be the best evidence base for it, except I've got anecdotal evidence of, N=1, that in some cases it can be transformative.
Yes, and as you say, with no side effects, only good side effects.
Only good
side effects. Yeah, and even for people who aren't suffering from something, so serious as that, but what I found is most people will just be living with things that just affect them in small ways, so that they're bloated after they eat, they're exhausted, they get brain fog, their skin's playing up. Most people just have stuff going on that they've got accustomed to, that they think is normal, but it's really common, but it's not normal for us to have all of these things. So, for example, I was coaching a lady recently who had lots of, she filled in the medical symptoms questionnaire, lots of different things going on, nothing dramatic, but just lots of little things. And one of the things was that she would get a really bad headache every day around 4 o'clock when she was meant to be helping the kids with their homework, and she would be having to, take pills every day just to cope with a headache. So the first thing that I got her to do when I realised she was having a bagel for breakfast every day was to get her on something that was a more nutritious breakfast. I think she switched to, it was scrambled eggs with some vegetables, something like that. And then she came to see me a couple of weeks later, and lo and behold, the headache had gone. And it never came back.
It's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah. And now I wasn't treating for the headache. Obviously, I'm not a doctor. It's not my business to treat headaches. But it just went as a side effect of her getting her blood sugar, under control. And so she was delighted that she could then help the kids with their homework and have that energy. But the point is that there are lots of reasons to have a headache, and her headache was different from, a couple of weeks ago, I dropped a pull-up bar on my head. I tell you what, I had a really bad headache from that for quite a few days, but the cause of that was completely different from her headache. And what I love about functional medicine is it addresses that there are different root causes for maybe symptoms that look on the surface to be quite similar.
So absolutely, so the individualisation of the treatment plan is really key. From two aspects, really. The first being that if somebody has fatigue or brain fog, the causes of that can be immense.
Yes.
And they can be anything from nutritional deficiency to food intolerance to chronic stress levels, to bacterial overgrowth, so bad bacteria in the gut making lots of horrible fermentation chemicals that are making them feel foggy. And actually pulling apart which of those is causing the issue is part of the skill of functional medicine. But what's amazing though is that the same intervention, say a dietary change to a whole foods, healthy diet and drinking plenty of water, might actually fix all those different root causes. And so the treatments that we've got, although the individual root cause might not be the same in every patient, could actually be, a similar intervention might work. So you advising a patient to change her breakfast when she's having headaches could have worked for a number of reasons, and we may never know why it worked.
I have no idea. I don't care. I couldn't care less why it worked. I just was happy, and she was happy that she wasn't having to take pills every day and battle a headache. So who knows what changed, but I'm not so interested in that side. I just want to see people feeling better. And it's so right what you say, often people will come to me with, they're feeling bloated or whatever, this, that and the other. And then a couple of weeks later, or a couple of months later, they show up and say, do you know, I don't need to take my antidepressants anymore. I feel completely different. And I wasn't trying to get them off any medication, but as you say, you get this lovely cluster effect where you fix one thing and a whole load of other things get fixed as well.
So I think the key is that the human body is just an amazing, intelligent organ, isn't it? It's just so amazingly clever. And if you give it what it needs, in general, it will help heal. It will heal itself.
Yes.
Unless things have gone, very out of balance, in which case we might need to do something really specifically targeted for that patient, then for the vast majority of people who've maybe got minor symptoms or who just want to feel full of energy and when they get up in the morning, a very similar set of interventions in terms of optimisation of diet and kind of fluid intake and sleep will make almost everybody feel better.
And that's such an empowering message, isn't it? That everybody, wherever you are on that spectrum, from being, you know, chronically ill to, I mean, you hardly ever meet someone who feels really, really well and vibrant with health. It's quite unusual. Certainly where we live in the northwest of England, it's not common. But wherever people are on that spectrum, that it's brilliant for them to know that they can feel better and have more energy and be more vibrant and get more out of life, just with some very simple changes.
Absolutely, and it's really nice. It's a really nice message about optimisation of health, isn't it, as well?
Yeah.
That, and that's something that perhaps for my NHS work, we don't have the luxury of being able to offer. We're always there firefighting when things have gone wrong and just trying to get people back to feeling normal, whatever
to fix them after they've broken.
Fix them after they've broken. Whereas, you know, from a health optimisation perspective, we're looking at getting patients who are kind of feeling okay, but maybe having skin issues or a bit of brain fog or some occasional headaches, to actually feeling really well and vibrant. And one of the interesting things is that people don't actually know that they're in a state of unwellness until you let them feel, until they feel better. Certainly that's my own experience.
And for me as well, I had no idea.
So I think both of us have had our own health challenges in the past. And for me, I would never have really thought of myself as being somebody who's unwell. But from a functional medicine perspective now, I know that if I filled in my own health intake form, I'd be one of my most sort of shocking patients. I had some pre-autoimmune problems by the time I was probably in my early 20s, because my body doesn't work particularly well if you don't look after it. But now I know how to kind of look after and care for my body. I feel so much better. But I'd never realised that I wasn't well until I made those changes.
Yes. But we're not taught at school how to look after our body. You know, we're taught 101 things. I mean, I could recite 17th century French poetry, but I had no idea how to eat properly or do anything for my body. But I thought I did, which is really dangerous. You know, I thought I was eating really well. But my goodness, I mean, when I think that it took me till my mid-40s for the penny to drop, you know, when I retrained, and I was so glad I did, because I would still be on an horrendous blood sugar roller coaster and you know, my mood all over the show. And I love what you said about the body being such an intelligent system, and it reminds me of I wasn't chronically ill. But I'm reminded of a story which is going to sound so ridiculous that I'm really going to regret sharing it with you, but I'm going to share it anyway. I was having to dress smart, so I was wearing a dress and I was looking for a pair of tights, you know, like the sheer tights. I was flinging them out of my drawer and some had ladders in and I couldn't quite find the right colour that didn't have a ladder in. And for guys listening in the States, where I don't think they call them tights, I think they have a different word, which I think might be pantyhose, right? Which sounds a bit...
You can't use that here.
No, it sounds a bit pervy, doesn't it? But anyway, so I found a pair of tights that had a little hole, sort of like I could hide it in my shoe, basically. Yeah. So it was fine. So went out, and after an hour or so, I remember saying to my husband, "Do you know, my toe really hurts?" And he said, "Oh, did you bang it or something?" I was like, "No, I don't remember banging it. Don't remember injuring it in any way." And for whatever reason, I did not actually take my shoe off, although it was just a slip-on sort of ballet pump, so it really wasn't. But I can't explain why, but I just didn't bother to take my shoe off to have a look. Which is weird, because if one of my kids would have come up to me and say, "Mummy, you know, my toe really hurts," I would have said, "Okay, let me have a look." Yeah. But I didn't, for whatever reason. Anyway, time went on, and after a couple of hours, I was actually limping. And I said to my husband, "You know, it's got so bad, I think I'm going to have to go and take a painkiller." So at this point, thank God, I actually had finally the presence of mind to take my shoe off. What did I find? I found that my poor big toe was actually being practically decapitated.
Strangulated.
Yes, by the hole in my tights that have sort of attached itself, and it was like it'd gone blue. So obviously I liberated my toe, and the blood came back in, and it went back to a normal colour, and the pain went. And the reason I share that absolutely preposterous story is that the pain was not the problem. The pain was my body screaming at me
to take the shoe off.
Yes, for goodness sake, you fool woman, take your shoe off and have a look what you've done to your toe. That was just the signal, but it wasn't the problem. And if I'd have gone to take a painkiller, I mean, I would have had to take a lot of painkillers to try and mitigate the pain from my foot, but it would never have got better until I addressed the actual cause. Yeah. So there is my little parable about functional medicine.
You say that sounds like a ridiculous thing to do, but
yeah,
from a functional medicine perspective, when I go back into NHS practice, that really is what we do a lot of the time.
Mask the symptoms.
Mask the symptoms.
Yeah.
With a pill.
Mm-hmm.
Or with some cream. So one of the commonest things that I have a bit of a bugbear about not finding out the root cause of allergic type illness.
Right.
Especially in children for whom, the burden of kind of medication in terms of steroid creams and moisturisers from petrochemicals, and if we're talking about eczema, those creams that have to be put on every day, and maybe infections which then require antibiotics. And for the majority of those children, what I've found from working through a functional medicine perspective is that you can find the triggers for those allergic problems, and if you remove them from the diet, then the child will no longer need the treatment.
Yeah.
Okay, and it's odd to me that is a controversial thing to do, whereas just giving them more and more cream, steroids are not without their side effects, and putting petrochemicals on a child's skin which gets absorbed is arguably not without toxicity. I just find it slightly crazy that actually we're not taking the shoe off to look at what the problem is actually underneath.
And what you've said about kids, it just reminds me of my son Louis, when he was 4. Basically, he was getting into trouble at nursery because he was pooing his pants. And he's fine me talking about this, by the way. Just make that clear.
Thanks, Lily.
I remember taking him to see my doctor on the nursery teacher's advice, and the doctor shone a light on his bottom, which didn't really reveal very much, unsurprisingly. And that was the extent of that, and suggested that we do a star chart, but none of that worked. And eventually, having seen another doctor, he was referred to a specialist, and he was under the specialist for several years, put on different laxatives, so in different amounts of laxative, and then switching to different, because none of them worked. Yes, and none of it worked. And I have to say that I was so in awe of this person that although a tiny voice said in my head, after kind of like quite a while that this had been going on, that this doesn't really seem to be working. And I would kind of very timidly say, do you think it's anything to do with what he's eating? And he would literally roll his eyes at me and say, Mrs. Grasky, it is nothing to do with his food, okay? It's his bowel. It's nothing to do with his digestion. And the only thing he'd asked me initially about his food is, does he eat fruit and does he drink water? And he did both of those, and that was the extent of it. So it went on and on and on, and I eventually got to the stage where he said, actually, I think that we may have to, because he was still not able to control his bowel, which is awful. I mean, it's an awful thing for a kid to be at school
age,
and not be able to control your bowel. And he said, I think we may have to put him in hospital and make him go to the toilet. And I remember just bursting into tears because he was so little and he was such a mummy's boy, and he wouldn't even stay at my mum's house. And the thought of leaving this child in a hospital with staff in uniforms and him being manhandled onto a toilet was just too much for me, you know. And I remember one day going to the pharmacist to pick up his prescription for these huge boxes of laxative. And Louis was so tiny. He was just so small. And now I look back and think, well, he wasn't absorbing any nutrition. You know, that's probably what was happening. But the pharmacist looked at Louis and looked at the prescription and said, "You're surely not going to give that to this child." And I was like, yes, he's under consultant. He's under the best consultant, you know, and that was how I shut down every conversation.
Yeah.
But a voice inside my head was saying, "She's right." Actually, it was a he. He's right. What are you doing? What are you doing to him? Now, I had no idea that what this child had was a leaky gut. I'd never heard the term. I didn't know anything about it. But eventually, after years, and after he was eventually put under general anaesthetic for a really awful procedure to see if there was something, you know, going on, I went to see someone else, you know, outside the traditional healthcare sphere, which
Outside the box,
which I really didn't want to do because I wanted to get him the very best treatment as my son, you know. I didn't want to go to some barking mad, you know, but in the end it
like
was
me.
well, no, you know, he wasn't like you at all. He was well, it was a naturopath actually that I went to initially, and she said, I think this is leaky gut. And I was like, leaky gut? What on earth is that? It sounds horrendous. And anyway, he was put on well, you call it a diet, whatever you want to call it, but of not having any gluten or sugar for 4 weeks it was. And I remember saying at the time, okay, fine, so where's the medicine? You know, surely there's some sort of herbal medicine I give him, because I was so used to shoving medicine down and chasing it down with Ribena full of artificial sweetness because he hated the medicine. And this guy said, "No, it's just food." I was like, "I don't understand. What do you mean it's just food? Where's the medicine? Give me the medicine." I was dumbstruck when after a few days he went from going to the toilet every 5 days to every 2, literally immediately, and then every 1. And he'd never ever done that. And I literally was watching him fix himself in front of my eyes within days. And I couldn't believe it. And I understood at that time, it was a really seminal moment for me, that the body wants to fix itself. The bowel wants to work. And there was nothing wrong with his bowel. He didn't need an operation. He didn't need to be put under general anaesthetic. He didn't need medication. What we needed to do was to take away the thing that was stopping the bowel working. Yeah. And once we did that, he just fixed himself in no time at all. Yeah. And that it was an incredible thing to see. And I think that has very much coloured my view of the human body ever since.
Absolutely. And for me, the very same experience, that elimination diet in chronic gut problems, chronic skin problems, autoimmune disease is one of the most powerful tools that we have available to us. You don't need to see a doctor if you want to do an elimination diet. There's loads of help out there on the internet, isn't there? Yeah. But the thing is that from a Western medicine point of view, there's great suspicion about stopping whole food groups.
Yes.
And I find it incredible that we are willing to put very small children onto medication that is really not designed for them, and we're willing to perhaps to give general anaesthetics and take out tonsils and do eardrum repair or put grommets in for children who actually, from my experience, if you just took dairy and maybe soy out of their diet, would no longer need those operations. And I know I'm not alone in kind of understanding that this is the case, and there's loads of evidence out there. There's lots of papers written about constipation and in children and middle ear problems and tonsil problems with regard to food intolerance, but yet we do everything else in terms of medication and surgery before that would even ever be thought about as a potential for helping a child, if ever.
Yeah.
And my perspective is that should be the first line thing that we do, but it is seen as quackery and something which doesn't have an evidence base, which is absolutely awful, because it does have an evidence base, but it doesn't have any pharmaceutical backing or money behind it. So, you know, there's no randomised control trial, so it's not going to get done. Yeah, I share your kind of frustration with the system. But I think, you know, I don't know how old Louis is now, but that must have been a few years ago.
Yeah,
but
it's a long time ago.
This is still happening now.
Yeah.
This is still happening.
Yeah, I was so upset to hear that my brother took his child with exactly the same problem to, I think, you know, a gastric specialist, whatever, and the same thing happened. He was put on
increasing doses of laxatives.
Yeah, and I said to my brother at one point, I said, will you maybe just try this? Maybe just try taking gluten out just for... Anyway, he did that, and he called me up after a week. He said, I am so angry.
Yeah.
He said, I cannot believe that this has worked after what we put that child through. He had these horrendous tests, and he said, I cannot believe that this has worked. This simple thing.
So between us, if we can put out one message today to all of those listeners who have children with digestive problems, if you take out gluten, dairy and soy just for 4 weeks as a trial, the vast majority of children's digestive symptoms will get better.
Yeah.
And you can put them back in one at a time and see which of those 3 things it is. You know, if you do nothing else, that will work the vast majority of the time.
Yes, absolutely. And I remember actually bumping into the consultant a few years later, and I was like, you know, do you remember me? Because I was just a thorn in his side. You know, he'd be like, Mrs. Glasky, it is nothing to do with food. You know, he'd get increasingly irate with me. And I said, it was the food. and I really hoped that he would say something like, really, you know, tell me more. I'd love to know. What did you do and how did it work? And I didn't get any of that. It was just kind of like, well, it's normally not da-da-da. And you know, I just thought, wouldn't it be nice just to kind of show a bit of interest into how this difficult case, because all of that time Louis had been under him, and I'd been in such awe, and so I'd been like a robot, really. I was reduced to being like a 12-year-old in that I was so unquestioning. I just took the prescription and I would leave his office without questioning ever. I think I was very frustrated myself looking back that I hadn't questioned, because you don't, you know, when you're with someone who's an expert, and I was always so in awe of any medical expert. Well, you think, well, what do you know? I mean, I was a PR consultant. What the hell did I know about the bowel? You know, I couldn't identify it in a lineup of organs. You know, so that was the thing. Is I just blindly followed what I was told and gave him the medicine.
So I think, to be fair to the medical profession, they can only offer advice that they've been taught.
Yes.
You know, they really, at medical school, we're not taught about nutrition. We're certainly not taught about elimination diets. That's kind of a very left field thing, whereas the naturopaths have been using them for decades.
Yeah.
And really, because it's outside their sphere of kind of expertise, most doctors don't like the feeling of being challenged, or and they don't want to work outside, you know, existing guidelines. So meeting that sort of blank wall, if you suggest that actually it's the food and you got it wrong, that's going to be a fairly typical reaction, because it's scary for doctors to kind of be challenged in that way about their knowledge.
Yes.
You know, hopefully, you know, the times are changing, and there are more and more doctors, hopefully in the future, going to be taught more about the impact of diet and nutrition on health. I think there is sort of a kind of movement and a bit of a sea change in terms of young doctors being more interested in this. So it's quite interesting. I went to London a couple of weeks ago to see Rangan Chatterjee and A.M. Panja.
Oh, is this the prescribing lifestyle medicine?
Prescribing the lifestyle medicine course in London, and it was really well attended. There were loads of doctors there, and it's great just to see that real interest in this field of medicine, which obviously, you know, none of us are taught about at med school, but, you know, there's interest in the profession.
Yeah,
you know,
fantastic.
And I think that's driven because there's interest from the patients.
Yeah.
And that will hopefully drive this kind of medicine into the spotlight.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And we're seeing now so many people reversing chronic conditions through lifestyle changes, you know, whether it be type 2 diabetes or, you know, all sorts of stuff. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
So, I mean, the best known sort of lifestyle medicine interventions are really around helping people with metabolic syndrome, type 2 diabetes, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. Really, we're talking about changing from high carb, low quality diets to low carb, whole food diets with improvements in like the quality of fats that are going in, healthy proteins, and big phytonutrient spectrum. So that's lots of different colours in the diet, lots of antioxidants. Those kind of radical dietary changes from the typical Western diet have a massive, massive impact on these diseases that are basically about sugar imbalances, blood sugar imbalances, which drives high levels of insulin. So things that drive us towards diabetes. And it's largely driven by our whole environment being diabetogenic kind of thing. So all the junk food and all the availability of food around us tends to take us towards those kind of low quality, high carb foods. And so from lifestyle medicine, reversal of type 2 diabetes is possible.
Yeah.
For almost everybody.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's also, when we talk about the junk food diet, it's also how it affects people's mental health as well. You know, obviously we're seeing an epidemic of mental health problems, and people often don't make the connection with a junk food diet. But there's such a strong...
There's a really strong connection, not only between the junk food diet, but then also the high stress levels that we have and that we live in today's society. So low sleep and high stress levels will also increase what's called cortisol, so the stress hormones, which will then raise blood sugars. So when we're looking at reversing diabetes, it's very much a holistic treatment plan which needs to be put in place.
So
low carb diet and improving sleep, reducing stress, making sure that people are getting the correct kind of exercise. I think Dr. David Unwin is probably the most kind of who you've
I just had his wife on actually on the podcast.
Fantastic. You know, he's renowned for helping to reverse type 2 diabetes in NHS patients. He's beautifully documented it and written up his research. But you know what? That hasn't translated into that programme being put into every GP practice in the country.
Not yet.
Hopefully it will. But we're still peddling the low fat diet in some places. I still see that happening, and there's a lot of confusion amongst health professionals about what they're allowed to say. And I think at the point at which we've got massively strong evidence for these dietary changes, we should we owe it to our patients to be talking about it.
Absolutely. And I loved what you said before about putting the emphasis on stress, because often when and we've teamed up on patients, haven't we, to get people better, and often people are expecting some sort of dietary sheet from me, and then they're surprised when I start to ask them about what they do to relax, what they do for fun, what they do for themselves, particularly with the women who are not very often, they're at the bottom of their own list and they're running around after everyone.
Children and everyone else.
Elderly parents, anyone but themselves. And it can be a battle sometimes to get them to actually, if someone has a belief that they are not worthy of getting better, which can come from lots of things, it can come from childhood and all sorts of stuff, they're not going to get better. And that's why I spend so much time working on people's beliefs about themselves and getting them to maybe dismantle things that they've been carrying around, you know, these false beliefs, as we call them, so that they can actually prioritise going for a walk, or maybe spending some time, whatever it is that lights them up, whether it's playing the guitar or having a bath or whatever it is. But that is so much a part of getting people well, you know, as well as training people how to eat. It's that, you know, from my experience, I now really start with the stress, because I find that if somebody is in that state of complete overwhelm, where they're so stressed they can't think straight, if I then ask them to radically change their diet, it's just too much. They just cannot take that on. So I always start very gently with, you know, what's one little thing that you can start to do, and it might be just a 5 minutes, you know, breathing exercise, or, you know, watching a bit of comedy in the morning, just anything that will just get them out of that stress response. And I'll often do that with them. You know, I do EFT, emotional freedom technique, and, you know, I'll do some Reiki on them maybe sometimes, but to get them in a more hopeful state and calmer before we put them on, you know, sort of more radical.
So that's what's really nice about pairing functional medicine with health coaching.
Yes.
Because, you know, I can look at somebody's test results, I can do very detailed tests, and I can tell them what the problem is, what I can see, and I can make suggestions. But in terms of a treatment plan from my clinic, they're always big holistic plans. So we always say, well, what we want to do is optimise sleep, reduce stress levels. We want to optimise the diet for you. There is not one single diet that's right for everybody. It's actually finding what works for you and finding what's workable as well. And it's about finding the kind of exercise and the me time that's right for each person as well. Now, I can give a list of recommendations, but actually I don't do anything for that patient apart from make those recommendations. They then have to go away and implement those. And for some people, I know they will just freeze and it doesn't happen. Okay, and they're the people that need basically somebody holding their hand, somebody to actually help them implement the changes. Because there's nothing easy about a functional medicine treatment plan.
No.
And it needs to be broken down and kind of made easier for them, and that's where the health coaching really kind of has those amazing strengths.
Yeah, and it's just taking those baby steps, isn't it? And being their cheerleader and just celebrating every little step that they take, so that they can begin to see that, you know what, I can take control of my own health. Because if you've been always used to being on the receiving end of medical treatment, you know, in that conventional scenario.
So it's really, what we do in functional medicine is really hand over the reins and the control to the patient, which is quite a radically different step than in normal medicine, where the doctor's in control and telling the patient what to do. Yes, we'll give instructions, but actually that all has to come from inside the patient. You know, that change needs to come from within.
And that's why the mind's so important. That's why we have to deal with their beliefs.
So I can offer my experience to say, if you do this, it's going to work. So I can offer my conviction and my enthusiasm, but they're going to have to translate that into action. And one of the other problems is, if you've got a big complicated problem, just doing one little thing won't always work. And so it's maintaining that enthusiasm to do lots of improvement to see the results that's really, really needed. So that kind of ongoing help and support, and the cheerleading that I know you're so good at offering, Susie, is really, really important.
I think people need that, because we just don't get enough of that, do we? Particularly not in the medical. You don't get a pat on the back for taking your metformin or whatever.
Well, maybe you do actually.
It's a beautiful model, and I know that you and I just, you know, we love working together, and we are passionate about it. Now, I think one of the sticking points, which I do feel we have to address, is at the moment functional medicine, it is expensive, isn't it, to go and see a practitioner. in the UK.
Yeah. It's always it's an expensive. It's expensive.
And the tests are
set
expensive.
Up as a practitioner. So as soon as you remove yourself from the NHS model, instead of seeing patients for 10 minutes and seeing, I don't know, like 35 patients a day, instead I'll see about 4 patients a day.
It's not a lot, is it?
It's not a lot.
Yeah.
So in a day I will see 4, occasionally 5 patients, although that's quite taxing on my brain. There's a lot of paperwork involved. So every patient is unique and they get assessed from birth or pre-birth to the present day. And I'll spend typically around 90 minutes, an hour to 90 minutes with them on the first consultation, and that'll be partly myself and partly the nutritional therapist. So I really, really listen to what is needed from the patient. We have a really in-depth talk about how their health problems might be affecting them, what might be causing them, are there any big life events, and we have a really good discussion about my understanding about what the problems may be and see how that meets with their understanding, and then we formulate a treatment plan. And that treatment plan is then taken up by my nutritional therapist, who then fleshes it out in terms of dietary changes. Maybe we use nutritional supplements, which we find very helpful for people who are very depleted or who've got gut problems and poor absorption issues. And then finally, so my nutritional therapist Ursula is also trained in mindfulness and meditation techniques, so she will do a lot of stress work with patients as well.
Which is so important.
It is so important to get those in there. Yeah. So by the time they've kind of spent, an hour and a half, 2 hours in our clinic, they then go away with a nutritional treatment plan, a stress treatment plan, and then a big report from me trying to explain what they've told me and how I see that as how I see the root causes, what my recommendations would be for further testing, and then I'll come back, say, once we've got their test results, say 6 weeks later. So in order to come and see me, by the time I've kind of done all that processing and paperwork, and we've looked at really in-depth test results, we may get say 150 to 300 different sets of results when a patient comes back to see me. This all takes time. Yeah. And so it's because of the time-consuming nature of functional medicine, it is expensive.
Yeah, because you're a bit like Columbo, aren't you? You're like searching for that thing that happened.
Yeah,
maybe
like a medical detective.
Yeah, like that may have happened decades ago when they were exposed
They may have been born with something that's unusual and perhaps needs addressing. And so, unfortunately, that kind of seeing 2 health professionals over a 2-hour period and maybe another, a couple of hours of work after the patient's left the clinic for each appointment does add up.
Yeah. But for people who maybe can't access direct treatment from a functional medicine practitioner at this point, the great news is there are so many resources, free resources out there now, which is amazing. So, we're doing a podcast now, but there's some brilliant podcasts that focus much more in depth about functional medicine. So I'd advise people to check out something like The Doctor's Pharmacy, which is with Dr. Mark Hyman. Broken Brain is another amazing one, and that's with Drew Purohit. And you can listen to these incredibly in-depth conversations with these amazing functional medicine practitioners and learn loads and be empowered, because this is what it's all about, this movement, isn't it? It's about empowering people.
And so empowering people, you don't need to see a functional medicine practitioner to do the basics yourself. Yeah. So if you're suffering from autoimmunity, I would really, really recommend reading Dr. Amy Myers. So she has a website, great. She's written a couple of books, and she really, really lays out the principles of reversal of autoimmune disease, which we haven't really discussed in her books. And if you've got chronic fatigue, Dr. Sarah Myhill is just amazingly generous with the amount of kind of free information that she offers on her website. And she's written a couple of really, really amazing books about the causes of chronic fatigue, which is largely regarded as a mystery illness with no cure from an NHS perspective.
And how depressing is that if you're suffering from it?
It's extremely depressing, and unfortunately one of the things that I see is that despite seeing patients improve, working with them in functional medicine, when I see people with chronic fatigue in NHS clinic, it's very, very difficult to access help for them. If there's not even NHS services widely available for chronic fatigue, and when there are, they tend to consist of psychological treatment and some graded exercise therapy, which really for many patients is just really not appropriate, because we're not understanding why it is they're ill. So even if I get to see them in NHS clinic, lots of patients I find it's really depressing. They say, well, I've got fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue, and I'm never going to get better. I'm just going to take all these drugs, and they're not interested in hearing that there might be something else. And I find that really sad, is that patients now believe that they're stuck forever like that.
Because that's what they've been led
That's what they've been led to believe,
yeah.
is that they're just going to have to pace themselves, and it's a forever diagnosis. So my experience is that if you work with patients, you can get improvements, but you have to work quite hard at it sometimes, and it might take you down a few blind avenues. But what I love about functional medicine is that you can actually help these cases that are just lost in traditional medicine. You can help these people regain their lives and their health again. And so it is possible. If you are out there and you're suffering from a chronic health problem, say chronic fatigue, go and read Dr Sarah Myhill's website. Go and have a look at functional medicine approaches in terms of diet, in terms of helping yourself detox. These things make a real difference. You don't have to suffer.
I will put links in the show notes to all of those. Thank you for sharing those. And finally, if people want to get in contact with you, Sarah, how can they do that?
So I have a website. It's www.drsarahdavies.co.uk. I'm soon to have social media sites. I've always shied away from that. I've just kind of concentrated. I've just concentrated on the medicine. I just love doing the medicine. I've not really been much of a self-publicist, but here I am today talking to you.
Here you are. Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for coming on. It's been gorgeous to chat to you as always. And let's just hope that this movement just grows and grows and helps more and more people to take back control of their own health.
Let's hope for that. Thank you, Susie.
Oh, my pleasure.